So I love how we have a mix of a certified financial planner. Congratulations, Matt Trogdon, with your CFP. Jason, who's talking about acting as a business owner, and David, who, with Jason, has taught a lot of kids, because through Fool School, our Fool School initiative, we've welcomed kids into Fool HQ, and we sometimes go out into the greater Washington, D.C. area, if invited, and teach kids. So you guys have a lot of experience talking to other people. I want you each to think briefly about a single term that you would want to make sure somebody knows what that word is, what it means, before they get started investing.
I'll go with equities. That's a term you hear thrown out a lot. Equity or equities. That's really just a fancy, or I might even say snobby way to say stocks. It's the same thing. Those terms are interchangeable. So, you know, it can be a fancy term that's thrown out there in the media, but when you hear equities, that's the same thing as a stock.
And I know for you and me, David, both of us love stocks. We're not the only ones at the table, but a little later, you're going to specifically be thinking about people who want to get started investing with a stock, and you're going to present a little bit more on that, because you guys all know that there are multiple ways to get started investing, what you're investing in. And I think, Matt, you'll be speaking to funds a little bit later, and Jason, you'll be speaking to getting kids going. So, yes, appreciate that. Coming from a fellow stock guy to another stock guy, you've just given one of the key terms that confuses people and makes a lot of people feel like they don't understand enough to really know what they're doing. But equities is, it's pretty easy to look up in the dictionary, and we might even use it sometimes in this podcast, but it's synonymous with stocks.
Yeah, just good to know. It's a simple term, but you've got to start with the basics.
I think I'll just jump in there and say returns. It's probably pretty easy to think that you're just telling me to just go back from where I started. You know, I mean, and that is not the case, obviously. When we talk about returns, we're talking about what is happening to your money. It's either growing or it's diminishing, and ideally we like to talk about the growing part, but over any given period of time, hopefully your money is increasing in value, your investment is increasing in value, and that would be your returns. And one of the fun, one of the more fun parts of our Fool School class is we get to go over a 10-year time period where we talk about the market's returns and how that would affect you if you were invested in the market for that 10-year stretch. And we reveal the returns for the stock market each year. I think we also compare it to a basic savings account, the returns that you would get with that. But the returns, that's the money that you're making.
Yes, and Jason, rule of thumb here, what is typically the stat that we quote as an annual return for the stock market measured over long periods of time?
I think we typically we quote anywhere between 6, 7, and 8%. I mean, I've heard all three, and so let's just go with 7. Let's cut it down the middle.
All right, and you know, I've often said 10,
yeah,
but that's not factoring in things like inflation. So if you take out 2% inflation, money, since it tends to get printed more and more over time, tends to be devalued when we print a lot of it. And so that's what creates inflation. And so if you're looking at historic returns for the market of 8, 9, or 10%, but you deduct 2% every year for that, the real return is somewhere closer to that 6 or 7. And all right, good. Matt, what term comes to mind for you?
I'm going to go with time horizon. And it's such an important term, I think, for investors. So much is dependent on what you consider your time horizon to be. So going back to our example of someone at the ripe young age of 36, he or she would be investing, in theory, with a time horizon of maybe 30 years or more.
Let's hope 50 or more.
Yeah.
Matt,
I mean, well,
you look really fit to me.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, I mean, I got you pegged for probably 60 or more, if you like.
Yeah, you got to keep eating the vegetables. But
Did we just double
see.
Your time horizon in less than 30 seconds?
Yeah,
that's
imagine
profound.
That.
Well done.
Imagine that. But if you're thinking about investing over a 30 or 50-year time horizon, then you should be making different decisions than if you're just investing over a 3 to 5 year time horizon. As we all know, the stock market can be extremely volatile over a 1 year period or even a 3 or a 5 year period. But historically, the trend is pretty steady in the upwards to the right direction if you look over 10, 20, 30 year periods. So just thinking about what your time horizon is before you start investing, I think will help you make decisions down the road.
And I think something else to add to that is that the longer your holding period or the longer your time horizon, the greater the odds that you will make money over the long term. Because looking at the data of the S&P 500 going back to 1871, there's actually never been any 20-year stretch where if you bought and held S&P 500 for 20 years, where you would actually lose money. You would gain money over every 20-year period. Going back to 1871, if you had bought the S&P 500, that goes through World War I, the Great Depression, World War II, the Great Recession. So lengthening that window where you can buy and hold stocks really dramatically increases your odds of coming out ahead as an investor.
And maybe I'll make that my term, the S&P 500. A lot of people who regularly listen to this podcast know that as the Standard & Poor's 500, but I'm sure we have some new listeners this week. And so I want to make sure that you know that the S&P 500 is 500 of the largest companies in America, and it's chosen by Standard & Poor's, which is a longtime publishing company that kind of got its brand on this group of stocks, the S&P 500. So it's companies like Apple and Home Depot and a lot of the companies you'd expect to be there, but we use the S&P 500 as a proxy for the overall market's return. There are certainly a lot more stocks than just those 500, but when you take those 500, that's a pretty good way of estimating how they do in a given year. We say that's how the stock market does. Now, you'll also hear the Dow Jones Industrial Average quoted on the nightly news and online sites like ours, and that's just 30 companies. It's a much smaller group, and it's a longer-standing traditional index. I don't think it's as effective a measure because it's just 30 companies, and there's some historicity that makes it a little bit funky, but it's so popular and so talked about that I did want to mention it here. But the S&P 500 for us here at Fool HQ, that's a group of companies and a phrase that we just take for granted. I would want to make sure anybody who's thinking getting started investing this week knows that you can buy an S&P 500 fund, which we might talk about later, or a lot of the companies that you might buy with, like Matt, when you bought JP Morgan back in the day as your first stock, that was pretty sure that was in the S&P 500.
Absolutely. One term that we haven't mentioned, but that I think is kind of beneath the surface of all of our other terms is compounding, right? And so the idea, I think the most powerful idea in investing, and certainly one of the more powerful things I ever learned was how money compounds and money grows. And compounding can work for you on the upside in the stock market, or it can work for you on the downside with credit card debt. But if you think about investing over a long period of time and getting a sustained return year after year after year, that money grows exponentially, not linearly, if that's a word. And that's something that I wish more people knew.
So that 8, 9, 10%, let's just call it 9%. So that first year, if you have an average year, your money just went up 9%. And as Jason said earlier, good news, you didn't have to do anything, right? That's one of the reasons I love investing. We can all be lazy bums and just make good choices, and your money, as Jason said earlier, works for you. So you're up 9%. That next year, you're up 9% more. Well, good news, you'd already made 9%. So if you had $1,000, you were actually at $1,090, and that goes up 9%, and all of a sudden that's more than just $90. And 10 and 20 and 30 years later, that starts being very profound. And maybe one of the heartbreak truths about people not investing is that they don't understand that, as Matt said. Often they're making the opposite mistake. They're actually paying at high double-digit rates credit card debt, and that's compounding against you as well. And that's what keeps a lot of people in a cycle of poverty or near poverty. They can't break indebtedness for that same reason. But again, going back to the positive here, those of us who've started investing, and that's the purpose of the podcast this week, is to get you on that train. And I'm glad you mentioned compounding, Matt, because it's so profound. Again, one of the heartbreak stories of investing is it's not that exciting to make $90 in your first year. It doesn't sound like something that was that big a deal. But when you can just play it forward 10, 25 years later, it is 9% at that point is really meaningful. Often you're going to be making more in an entire year off 9% 25 years from now than you started with today. And part of what we're trying to do here at the Motley Fool is open people's eyes to recognize that that's how life works, and get on that train.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest mistakes I see with folks who are just getting into investing at an older age is because they have delayed that for so long, they feel like they have to make up extra ground. And unfortunately, that's not the way it works, right? We talk about people wanting to get rich quick, and if it was that easy, I mean, like I said, everybody would be doing it. So if you are just getting started in investing and you're 35 or 40 years old, make sure you're going in there with the appropriate expectations, right? Don't think that this is going to be your opportunity just to make up all of this lost ground. It doesn't work that way. You do need to get started, but really time is your buddy. And that's what we teach these kids all the time. That's what we were taught as kids. It is amazing the difference that time makes. And when you're 15 and you're getting into investing, most people don't really care about it all that much. Then all of a sudden you're 30 and you realize, oh yeah, I've got that investment account that's been working for me all these years. And that was really my goal in starting my kids out at 5 and 6. They don't care about this stuff that much. We talk about it every once in a while, but my goal was for them to have a living, breathing example so that when they are adults, they can look back at it and say, wow, that's a powerful lesson. I'm going to keep that ball rolling.
Yeah, it's far better to start now with something with a smaller amount of money rather than wait for some arbitrary number to save and invest down the road. Just start with $50, $100 today, because the sooner you start, you let that magic of compounding work in your favor rather than delaying that down the road. Something that we do with the kids that always gets them jazzed up, and I think it's a condensed game or experiment to highlight the power of compounding. But imagine you have a 30-day period, a 1-month period, where you have two options. Option one is you can start with a penny and double its value every day. So day 1, 1 penny, day 2, 2 pennies, day 3, 4 pennies, and so on for 30 days. Or option 2 is receiving $100,000 each day for 30 days. So which one do you think would be worth more on day 30?
I'm guessing most of us would think that 100,000 because that's so amazing, but I'm pretty sure the main point of this exercise, David, is the power of compounding.
Exactly, yeah. So with option 2, with $100,000 a day after 30 days, you have $3 million. But with the penny doubling, compounding each day for 30 days, that's worth $5.4 million.
So it's not even close. Not even close.
Yeah.
Total blowout.
Yeah, so let compounding work in your favor. So that's a message to hammer home here.
Not only that, but on day 32, or wait, were you doing 30 days?
30 days, yeah.
Fine.
So on this wasn't February.
Right, so September, right? So on October 1st, day 31, that 5.4 goes to 10.8 million,
Yep.
and you still just got that lousy, doesn't sound that lousy, but lousy $100,000 for the person who made the wrong choice back on day 1. So if you play it forward from there, it gets stark.
Pretty sweet, yeah.
Yeah. What a great example.
Yeah.
Well, I think if you to make it a little bit darker, how many 55-year-olds do we know that say, oh, I want to retire in 7 years, or I want to retire in 10 years, but I don't think I'm going to be able to. I wish I had another 10 years to save. Now, if someone had been able to start saving at 25 instead of 35, or 35 instead of 45, well, there's your 10 years right there. So it's a lot easier to do those 10 years on the front end if you have the money and are able to do it, than have to wait to do those 10 years on the back end and potentially have to work longer.